Hi, I'm Kristen, and I want to show you my favorite way to paper piece. We're going to start by making this lovely mountain block. So let's get our supplies together. You need fabric. This is a great way to use up scraps because you don't need very big pieces. You, of course, need your paper piecing pattern. You can print it out on regular copier paper or on foundation paper. Our favorite is this one by Carol Doak, which tears away easy when you're done, which is very important. You're going to need a ruler, a rotary ruler that's got a 1/4 inch mark. This works. Or the add a 1/4 ruler. Has a nice little lip on it that makes it easy to find that 1/4 inch. You'll need a rotary cutter, a rotary mat, a glue stick, and a postcard. We've also got a light box here to help us line everything up, or you can hold your pattern up to the light, the window or the ceiling. So let's take a look at our pattern. Your pattern is going to have a bunch of numbers on it. These are the order in which you sew. So this is a number 1, then we're going to go to this shape, number 2, then sew number 3. They're also going to have an indication of what color fabric you use. Ours has little symbols. And then the solid lines are the lines you're going to sew on, and the dotted line indicates your seam allowance. You want to make sure when you're placing your fabric, and we'll go over this again, that your fabric covers the seam allowance so that when you're all done, you have the right size block. All right, let's get started. Okay, we're ready to start putting this together. The first thing I'm going to do is identify piece number 1. That's where I'm going to start. And this is a teeny tiny little piece of snow, which is going to be white fabric. I am going to turn this over because we'll be stitching on the printed side on these lines, but we're going to put our fabric on the unprinted side. Our first piece will always go face up, like so. And you want to make sure that your piece extends at least a 1/4 inch beyond the lines of the shape. We can turn this over and maybe get a better look. Right there, it's at least a 1/4 inch. I'm going to hold this in place with a little bit of glue stick that I'm going to put basically on that first shape. Mine's really tiny, so I extended beyond it a little bit. I'm going to turn this over now, and I'm going to find that line between piece 1 and piece 2 and line up my postcard and fold my paper back against it and use my add a 1/4 or your regular ruler to trim that seam allowance to exactly a 1/4 inch. That leaves you a really nice line to line up your next piece. So our next piece is piece number 2. That's going to be a blue mountain. And now all the pieces from here on out are going to be placed right sides together. So here's my first piece, right side up. Here's my second piece, right side facing. I'm going to line up that seam allowance line. I can move it over to my light box or hold it up to some light to see that it extends beyond the boundaries of that shape here, and it's going all the way out into my seam allowance. When I like where it's placed, then I can go over to my sewing machine. I can put a little pin in there to hold it in place while I go to the sewing machine. Okay, I'm at my sewing machine now, and exact numbers are going to change depending on what brand of sewing machine you have. But notice that I've changed my stitch length to be smaller than the default. The stitching is going to perforate your paper, so the smaller your stitch, the more perforations you'll have and the easier it will be to tear away the foundation later. You're also going to have a harder time unpicking any mistakes, so find the balance that works best for you. Now, when I'm ready to stitch, I'm going to stitch on the line between pieces 1 and 2. I'm going to start 1 or 2 stitches before the line and I'm going to stop 1 or 2 stitches after. And that's it. Now I can press this open and move on to the next piece. So I've sewn piece 1 and piece 2 together. Now I open it up. I can finger press, or I can take it to my iron and do a light press, no steam. You don't want to distort your paper. Now I'm going to turn it over, and I'm going to find the next line that I sew. Now it's going to be between 2 and 3. I'm going to take my postcard, fold back on that line between 2 and 3, and the shape only goes to about there. So I'm just going to cut about like that. Get that one out of the way, and I can kind of rough cut that excess there. Now I've got a nice line here for piece 3, which is sky. So I'm going to line a straight edge up with my trimmed edge. I'm going to double check. Actually, I'm going to flip just to test, and double check on my light box that I extend at least 1/4 of an inch. And here I'm going to extend out beyond that seam allowance. Okay. And now I go back to the sewing machine. So here, since I'm sewing out to the seam allowance, the outer seam allowance of the block, I'm going to actually start sewing way out beyond my dotted line. And then I'm just going to come on in. And sew a couple stitches beyond the line between 2 and 3. Love the auto cutter on this machine. And there we go. Back to the cutting table. All right, so piece 3 has now been sewn to pieces 1 and 2. I'm going to flip it over, and the next line I'm going to sew is between 3 and 4, which also goes across 1. I'm going to place my postcard, fold back against that line, use my add a 1/4 to get a nice 1/4 inch, and cut away the excess. And again, this goes beyond the block, so I'm just going to roughly cut that excess out of the way. My next piece, number 4, is also sky. So we'll use that same fabric again. I'm going to line up a straight edge here. Again, right sides together. Flip it over to test. Uh-oh, that one I can tell isn't big enough. So I'm going to scooch it down. Maybe I'll go from this end. I'm going to test, and I can see that's plenty big enough to cover my shape. Now I'm going to go sew. Okay, so that was our last piece. Now I can give it a good press and then trim to our final finish, our final block size. The add a quarter ruler is not going to work so great this time. I'm going to go to my regular quilting rotary ruler, and I'm going to cut this time on the dotted lines. So this is my block with its seam allowances. Okay, there's our beautiful finished block, and you can go make more, or if you're ready to sew this into your final quilt or project, you can now gently tear away all your foundation paper. And look how easy that tears with my tiny seam allowance, or tiny stitch size, and my foundation paper. Tear all that away. Sometimes you might need a little tweezers in the tiny corners. It's tedious, but your block is going to be beautiful when it's all done. There you go. Okay, so I've torn all the fabric, or all the paper off of the back of my block. You'll notice I used brown thread. You probably want to choose a nice neutral thread that blends into the colors that you're using. There's my finished block. Now I'm going to go find something to sew it into. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks.